I'm willing to say he's the basement coach of the year.
It's 2 games. They got to get something rolling.
This is the Sports Saga podcast, and it is presented by Aldias Electric. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us wherever you are watching or listening. Brady Kudo with the lead writer and founder of FriarBasketball.com, Kevin Farrahar. Kevin, we've been waiting for this for a while now. Thank you so much for joining us, and most importantly, how are you?
Doing well, Brady. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Of course, you're the reason why I'm wearing the hat and the shirt today.
Nice.
Had to go all out for you. All right. So as we know, the Providence Friars won the Big East regular season for the first time in program history. Made a trip to the Sweet 16 for the first time in 25 years. But way before all that, you started this little website called FriarBasketball.com. So what led to that? What made you want to start what made you decide to start writing for the Friars?
Yeah, so I had done a couple writing, I guess, assignments, you can call it, for a couple different sites previously, but I really wanted to have something on my own. But this is way back in like 2009, and there really weren't that many avenues available to kind of create your own site that made it easy. Like, I'm much more of a writer than I am a web designer or web creator. So once blogs became easier to publish and they were kind of like uniform platforms, it became much easier. So for me, like once that was available, what I really spent a lot of time thinking about is like, okay, if I'm going to do this, like, what's my angle going to be? What's going to stand out? What's going to make this different? Right. So for me early on, it was all about tackling recruiting and local recruiting. I think a lot of people at the time had done a lot of like national recruiting, but it kind of like based off of what reports were out there versus like I wanted to go and see a lot of these guys in person like multiple times. So I could be like, all right, here's what I've seen after like a handful of times watching these kids. So, and at the time, PC, the on-court product really wasn't great. They had Keno Davis was their coach back then, and they were kind of struggling. So a lot of the focus was on recruiting, and they were recruiting a lot of local guys. So that's kind of how I found my niche. It just kind of grew from there.
Since at that time, Keno Davis was in the later of his career at Providence. Then Ed Cooley, it was able to get Ricky Lito, Bryce Cotton, I think just won another MVP down in Australia.
Yeah.
Obviously now LaDante Henton, who's now on the staff, and I feel like it just grew, right? The recruiting job that Cooley's done, I've seen worse. I mean, now it's all about the transfer portal. But again, the local recruiting, he's done so well with even the more recent guys with Duke and Reeves. Um, you can't say it's been bad, I guess is how we could put it. So coming off of last year, right, let's start about last year. Not like it was the first round exit in the Big East tournament to DePaul, like a really underachieving season. I don't really think there's another way to put it. David Duke leaves. So many guys transfer, but then they come in and they get Horkler. They had Horkler, Mania, Durham, and you eventually you're starting 5 seniors and or grad students. So what did you think coming into this past season? Were you an optimist like me? Or were you a realist like the rest of the world, expecting them to do nothing?
Yeah, I spent some time last summer watching Mania and Durham, and I was really impressed with, what I saw from them, especially Mania. His versatility defensively really stood out, which we saw at PC. And Durham, I just thought could do a lot more than he's being given credit for. But with that being said, I didn't see them making a run to the top of the Big East. I was like, well, and you got to remember too, like Jared Bynum was coming off of a really down year. No one first saw that coming. Like Noah Horkler really just played well at the very tail end of the season. So there were still a lot of question marks. So in my head, going into last year, I was thinking like, well, if they could, if things break right, maybe they'll be like a 4 or 5 seed in the Big East and get into the tournament. I was not expecting a run to the top. What were your thoughts heading into last year?
So I had looked at like I'm a superstition type of person, and I'm like, oh well, if they get this, they'll do well. And for me, it was Al Durham. It was an experienced point guard because we've looked. A great example I actually thought of was Luwan Pipkins, and the one year that he played for us, he was a grad student point guard who had transferred in. And if it wasn't for COVID, I really think they were going to win the Big East tournament. And I really think they were going to do well in the NCAA tournament. So what I found is that generally, if they load it with experience, they're going to do well. I didn't think they were going to win the Big East. I didn't think they were going to go to the Sweet 16 until maybe 2 weeks before the Big East tournament. But I generally thought they were going to be like, all right, three. I thought Villanova was going to win, and I thought Creighton was going to come in second. I thought it was going to go Villanova, Creighton, Providence, UConn, Marquette.
Mhm.
Was not expecting 4 losses. What was it? 4 losses, 5 losses?
Yeah.
Was not expecting, I mean, Ed Cooley to win the Naismith Coach of the Year. So I think this past season, it was just a building block because now oh, by the way, another guy from South Carolina named Devin Carter just came in, has 3 years of eligibility. He's a lot like Minaya, I feel like. Clifton Moore from LaSalle is now coming in. He's a lot like Croswell. Oh, by the way, he's from LaSalle as well. So I feel like, I don't know about you, but last season, that was just the beginning of what I feel like is going to be more dominance for Providence, especially now that Jay Wright is finally out. I mean, he had a great career. Don't get me wrong, one of the best coaches ever. He's finally out of the Big East. So, do you think this is really like, is this Cooley's league to lose?
Well, the next couple of years should be pretty good because you think that the difference is with the transfers they added, right? Like
Yeah.
Corey Floyd, Devin Carter, Bryce
That's right.
Hopkins.
Corey Floyd, another one that like I don't feel like anybody's talking about.
Yeah, they'll all have at least 3 years of eligibility. That's the difference. As great as Minaya and Durham were, we got to enjoy them for 1 year, whereas they really have. It's essentially like bringing in a freshman class, like a high school recruiting class with these guys. Only they have a little bit of experience, and other than Floyd, like they're pretty proven. I think it's going to be interesting because the Big East now, they lost Jay Wright, but they added Sean Miller and they added
That's
Thad
true.
Matta, add Xavier and Butler. So those are two great coaches. So as much as, we'll see what happens at Nova, but to me, those are two really big steps forward for those programs. And I thought, to be honest, I thought Xavier was as talented as anybody last year. They just
Yeah.
didn't pull it together and they fallen apart the last like 3 or 4 years, and it happened again. So I think Sean Miller's gonna be really good there, but I think PC is well positioned to be a top, 3 team in the league going forward as long as Cooley's here.
Yeah.
This is the best I felt about their kind of foundation of young guys in quite a while. I feel like it had been a while. They had some recruiting classes that were, you know, not quite where Cooley had it like 3 or 4 years prior. But I think they're really well positioned. It'll be interesting though because they have so many new faces, and a lot of the guards they brought in are kind of similar profiles. So it'll be interesting to see who kind of wins out for minutes and how that all shakes out.
Yeah. Now, Sean Miller coming in, like I was there at that triple overtime game. I've said that's the best basketball game I've ever seen. And I agree, like Xavier was a tournament team. And then something happened, it just collapsed. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was. But I mean, again, Sean Miller, all this stuff in Arizona with the investigation, blah, 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 blah. Do you think that could have an effect on their season? Do you really think Xavier's going to let the outside noise maybe bother them a little bit? I don't think they will. I just want to know, like, do you think?
I don't think so. Because you look at like a lot of these guys that were considered pariahs before, like Bruce Pearl at Auburn or
Right.
Kelvin Sampson at Houston, like they had those programs like the top of the nation, right? It's funny how those things have a way of getting forgotten after a year or so, and you know, completely different scenario. But obviously Cooley's never been any sort of trouble in that regard. But it's amazing how the perception of these coaches and the programs can change in a year. Like people were kind of down on Providence a year ago, and now they're flying really high, right? So in the same way, like a coach like Sean Miller, he has a great year at Xavier this year. People kind of tend to put that behind them because at the end of the day, too, like a lot of these guys, a lot of the people in the media are like former coaches. They're all kind of friends. Like they're not going to get hammered too much. But we saw a lot. I don't know. I feel like we've seen these coaches get in trouble forever,
Right.
and and I feel like rules are changing too, right? With athletes can get paid now. I think
Yes.
people kind of look at the old system like, well, maybe they were working, and it was cheating, no doubt, but they were working under kind of an archaic system. I just feel like the whole perspective has changed in that regard. And I just think that it's rare that these guys are like super vilified and people remember forever, that they keep that baggage with them where they can't coach and have success again.
Yeah. Now, speaking of success, the Big East just brought in one of the more successful coaches of this generation, Thad Matta, who's been out of coaching for a little while, right? Was with Ohio State, did have some health issues, but he said he's good to go. But I think Butler's just going to remain Butler. Just they're there. I really don't think they're going to do anything special. I really don't see them because a lot of people thought towards the end of the year. I feel like all right, maybe there's a chance, and there wasn't. Where do you see Butler next season?
Yeah, I mean, Thad Matta, he was a great coach, but he's been gone for a while. And that's the thing. I wonder how much energy these guys bring back. Like, it's one thing to be out of the sport for a year, but when you're gone for years, to me, it's really hard to come back with that same energy because this is an
Right.
exhausting job. And I feel like, too, the job's changing so much now, the transfer portal and NIL, where like what he's coming back to is dramatically different. And
Exactly.
it very well could work out, but I just feel like it's really hard in any profession to go away for years and then come back with the same level of energy and success. So I think part of it too is like our Providence has always matched up really well with Butler. So I think our local perspective of them is like, oh, that's a team we always kind of handle. Right. Like it's kind of funny how those matchups work. Like they always gave Villanova a really hard time, but you know, it seemed like PC could kind of bully them. I think the one thing that they're doing a little bit differently now, they added two really big men to the transfer portal this offseason. So that was the advantage I felt like PC always had. I don't know if you agree. I always felt like PC against Creighton in the years past or Butler could always kind of out physical them.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one thing if Thad Matta can make them a little more physical in the front court, that might make a difference. But
Yeah.
we'll see. I'm not as high. I mean, Sean Miller, I think, is going to be a complete home run, but
Oh
Thad
yeah.
Matta, I'm not quite as high on.
100%. I'm 100% agree on Sean Miller. Um, he'll be more of a home run than I think his little brother will be at little brother, but Archie Miller at URI. But um, so irrelevant. I'm sorry. I'm so biased today. I'm never this biased. Um, but no, seriously, I think like Sean Miller, like he's just historically speaking, Thad Matta is a better coach. But again, he's been out of it for what 4 or 5 years now. The game has completely changed. Completely changed. So as much as like tactically Mon is better, I'm giving the advantage to Miller here just because he knows the modern game better. And I think like you're talking about physicality, Creighton, they've been a guard factory. Where Providence, they've been more of a forward. I'm not going to say big man factory, but they've been more of a forward factory. So, and especially, I mean, Butler didn't really have a big man until they brought up Bryce Golden, and Golden didn't have a bad year. He was one of the lone bright spots for them. But I absolutely think that that physicality is going to be matched, even a little bit by Butler. But people seem to forget. I don't think that like all right, Watson leaves, but they found the perfect. I mean, if you want to call it a replacement, I'm thinking of it more as a successor in Clifton Moore because he's just as big as Watson, and he's a great rebounder. We've seen his tape. He's a great rebounder.
Yeah, I've compared him to Emmett Holt. I think he's
Yeah,
got a similar game. He's bigger than Emmett. He's probably 6'10", 6'9", 6'10", like 240.
I think he goes
But
6'10".
he's pretty versatile. I don't think he's quite with some work in the offseason, he could be a three-point shooter, but he's the kind of guy he can put the ball on the deck. He's a really good post scorer and he's a really good passer. Like a surprisingly,
Yeah.
his assist numbers aren't great, but kind of those like hockey assists. He moves the ball really well out of the post, and they kind of ran some offense to him off like the top of the key. So I think he's going to be a really big surprise for PC fans, much in the way that kind of like Mania and Durham
Yeah.
People were excited about, but I think they were even better than they thought. I think Clifton Moore is better than people think.
You mentioned Durham, and again, he was a transfer last year nobody talked about, and they should have been talking about because people forget that Al Durham was a 1,000-point scorer in the Big Ten. Scored 1,000 points in 4 years in the toughest conference, and then he came to Providence. I for one was like 1,000 points in the Big Ten, great. It's exactly what we needed, and look at that, we were right, exactly what we needed. The closer. Um, Speaking of surprises, Jared Bynum went from 5 points a game to 32 off the bench against Georgetown in January of last season. Give me the Kevin Farrar grade of Jared Bynum's evolution. How big has he been for the Friars?
Yeah, he was huge. I mean, I think a lot of times people remember like the last thing they saw, and that kind of sticks with them. Like I feel like that Kansas game is stuck with them a little bit, where people are it's overshadowing just how great he was in the Big East. I mean, I think he shot. I have to go back and look. I think he shot like 45% from three and averaged like 15 a game in the Big East.
Yeah,
He was awesome. And going back to like the first game he came back, remember the UConn game? Like he hadn't played, and he came back and made like 3 or 4 plays in that game that really kept UConn at bay and were huge momentum changers. And he just seemed to get better and better. I mean, his evolution's really, I think the one thing people need to tap the brakes a little bit on, like Alan Breed. They're like, well, look at what Jared Bynum did. It's like, yeah, but what Bynum did is like not normal. Like that was,
that doesn't
I'm
happen.
not saying Breed can't play a lot better, but you also have to kind of respect the fact that what Bynum did was incredible. Like I was, and I like Bynum. I liked him more than most people. I think people were down on him because of the way he shot, but I was like, I just feel like he's a point guard and a creator. Um, and I get why people were down on him, but I just felt like last year kind of snowballed where he didn't shoot the ball well, then he got hurt. And I wasn't expecting this, obviously, but as far as improvements, like I can't remember. I've been watching PC since the early '90s. Like I can't remember a player improving this. I guess for longer term PC fans, it might be like a Billy Donovan kind of thing. But
Yeah.
unless I'm completely forgetting someone, I can't remember somebody who improved this much in 1 year. It was incredible.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think like point guards of the past. I mean, or even not just point guards, just players who like God, Sham God. I mean, yeah, I mean he didn't really have that year two, year three. Whoa. Like he didn't have, I don't think anybody had that like Bynum.
I guess I mean Bryce Cotton went from like not playing his freshman year to hitting like 73s as a sophomore, but his game kind of more evolved over the course of like 3 years, whereas
Right.
Bynum, this was like a 1 year like completely different player. And Cotton was way more effective, but
Oh yeah.
he didn't play a ton as a freshman, so it's harder. It's not like we saw him play a lot and he really struggled. He just didn't play a ton. And then Cooley comes here in his first year and he takes off. So I guess Cotton would be the closest thing we saw, and it was a huge jump. But
Yeah.
I think Bynum's is the biggest I've seen at PC.
Yeah, I was one of those that you were talking about where it was like some people were down on Bynum. Yeah, I didn't like him. I'll admit it. First year he came in, I was like, I don't like this guy. Not that good. He's a good passer, not that good of a shooter. Not what we need in our starting point guard. And then next year, I was like, oh boy, yeah. Or this past year, I was like, yeah, here we go. Bynum again. Can't shoot. And then again, it was after he got hurt. I was honestly, I stood in front of the TV. I was like, I was wrong. I was wrong. And then I have a buddy who was a season ticket holder and really liked Bynum. Like, really, I was like, yeah, but he can't shoot. But he was like, doesn't matter. Like, that's not everything. I was like, this is true, but kind of need your point guard to shoot. And I looked at him one day. Nolan, you were right. Like, yeah, I like Bynum now. He was like, yeah, about time. I was like, it takes time for some people, I guess. And yeah, Bynum it just took some time. And then he found his role. Now he's going to be a starting point guard. So I'm going to look at like, what do we see them starting? I see Bynum starting, um, Devin Carter, um, Noah Locke.
Yeah.
That's another transfer nobody's talking about. I think Croswell and Moore. I'd say that's the starting five. Am I forgetting anybody?
The kid Hopkins from Kentucky.
Hopkins, that's right. No, Hopkins in front of Croswell, I think. Um, and then more.
Yeah,
That's it.
I think it's gonna. I think Locke's gonna be in there just because he brings something totally different, like with his shooting.
Oh yeah, he's a
If
great
you
shooter.
look at like a lot, they have a lot of combo guards. Like I kind of alluded to this earlier. Like I think Devin Carter's at the top of the pecking order, but Alan Breed's been in the system for 2 years, and then you've got Quante Berry and Corey Floyd, who are kind of similar offensively, at least like combo guards who are more like drivers than shooters at this point. So I just think Locke is going to be in there. He's the guy who's hit almost 300 threes, and he's shot like, he shot 40% for 3 years from three in the SEC. So he's a guy who's just like solid. Um, I would assume. So I think Cooley's decision is going to be, does he want to go? Because the big advantage they had last year is they were big across the board. Like when they started Durham, their smallest guy was 6'4", and then they had AJ at 6'6", Minai at 6'7", and Horkler and Nate. So they were big.
Right.
So this year would look a lot different if they went, I would assume, and it's so early, but I assume it would be Carter, Locke, Bynum. Then you're looking at like 5'10", 6'3", 6'3".
Right.
And then probably Hopkins as like your hybrid small ball four.
And he's
And
6'6".
and then probably Croswell with Moore as like your first guy off the bench. But if you wanted to go bigger, they could go Croswell and Moore with Hopkins at the three. But I think Hopkins is definitely going to start. So it'll be interesting. I just think it's going to be harder this year in Cooley because I felt like last year it was much more clear cut like what the rotation was going to be, and their guys were different enough. Whereas I feel like now they have a lot of guards who are kind of similar. So it's going to be kind of like, let me the best man win. Like whoever's playing the best in practice is getting out there. So that'll be kind of interesting.
One thing I feel like is guaranteed for the Friars, and it's that it's the expectation. The expectation is to get back to the NCAA tournament. And I feel like that they have the team to do that. They didn't, a lot of people thought this was going to be a rebuild year. The Friars don't rebuild, they reload. Kevin Farrahar. That is going to conclude our episode of the Sports Saga podcast presented by Al Dias Electric. Al is right here in southeastern Massachusetts and Rhode Island, specializes in Generac generators and all your electrical needs. If you need any services done, give him a call today at 508-889-4265. If you liked what you saw today, please consider liking this video or episode and subscribing to us and finding us across social media. For Kevin Farrahar, who will be enjoying some Game 7 action later today, Celtics win by at least 5. You heard it here first. I'm Brady Kudo saying so long and go Seas.